Welcome to the Higher Ed Jobs Podcast. I'm Andy Hibble, the Chief Operating Officer and one of the co-founders of Higher Ed Jobs.
And I'm Kelly Sherwin, the Director of Editorial Strategy. Today, we're joined by Dr. Paul Tontz, Clinical Assistant Professor in the Higher Ed and Post-Secondary Education Program at Arizona State University, and Dr. Monteigne Long, Director of Veteran and Military Services for the Texas A&M University System. Thank you both for joining us.
Good morning.
Today, we'll focus on their edited collection, Supporting Military-Connected College Students, Applying Theory to Student Affairs Practice, and discuss how theory and practice can work together to better support military-affiliated students across our campuses. Dr. Tontz brings more than 2 decades of experience in student affairs and higher education. His work has spanned academic advising, counseling, orientation, and student success initiatives supporting a wide range of student populations, including first-generation students, student athletes, international students, and military-connected learners. At Arizona State University, he teaches in the higher ed and post-secondary education program, where his work focuses on student development theory, advising practices, and research related to student success and support systems. Dr. Long is a system-level higher education leader and advocate for veteran and military-connected learners. She serves as Director of Veteran and Military Services for Texas A&M University System, where she leads initiatives that support access, engagement, leadership development, and workforce pathways across the system's 12 universities. In addition to her system-level leadership, she works directly with students at Texas A&M University and teaches leadership courses focused on ethical decision-making and values-based leadership. Together, they've co-edited Supporting Military-Connected College Students, a collection that brings together research and practitioner perspectives to help higher ed institutions better understand and support student, veterans, and military-connected learners. Paul, Montaigne, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
A lot of our listeners may not work with the military population or student veterans on campus. Can you each help us set the stage for those listeners and describe, from your perspectives, what the environment of military-affiliated services in higher education looks like right now?
Some of the trends that we're seeing right now, and also this is covered in the book, is that we're having a lot of changing demographics of the student population that we're serving. After the passage of the post 9/11 GI Bill, 2009, 2010, late 2010s, we were serving primarily student veterans. But as the years have gone on, we are now starting to serve more and more military-connected family members. The veteran numbers have kind of remained static, while those family member numbers have just grown exponentially. So this means a shift in how we approach our resources and programming and engagement with our students in our veteran resource centers, taking a more military-connected student approach to the way that we are designing the work that we do. Also, we are seeing, an increase in that term military-connected because we are serving National Guard, Reserve, active duty students. These are some populations I think that we didn't historically really include or think about in the way that we designed programming and resources for our students. And so again, just considering that military-connected, that's not a monolith, right? Like it's not just a student veteran experience, but it's all types of service, whether that's, active duty, part-time duty, former service members, or their family members.
Yeah, and I would agree, and also add that there's been a shift, I think. Initially, most of the services on campus were to help student veterans with compliance and getting their benefits, right? And now there's been a shift towards looking at how can we more holistically support them with programming and support with workforce pathways development, prior learning, et cetera. So I think there's an awareness that they are integrated on our campus, right? And there's been a shift to how can we continue to support them.
I love that. It seems it's less like not just transactional, but more, like you said, holistic. And let's look at the big picture of how to support this population. So that's great. Thank you guys for that.
I'd actually like to chime in a little bit here and challenge our listeners just a little bit. The idea of whether or not you feel like you've worked with somebody who's military connected. I believe there's a lot of stakeholders out there that are silent military connected stakeholders. It's not something that's obvious on campus always. Sometimes it is, and we can think of what the times are that are obvious, but not every military connected stakeholder kind of wears it on their sleeve. And so I'd kind of challenge you to look around and see the different stakeholders that you know of and think of the time that person that like, boy, I've known you for a long time. I've had you in 3 classes of mine. I never knew. I think that has become much, much more common, particularly in today's day and age, way campuses are. And not that there's differing opinions necessarily, but it's not one of those conversations that all folks want to get engaged with right off the bat. So I think we've seen more of that. The data in higher ed jobs absolutely reflects a lot of military connectedness on campus. So um, see if you can look around campus and think of those times.
I think you're spot on, Andy. I think that that is sometimes an assumption, right? Since we don't see them, they're not there. So I know Montaigne and I are very intentional about how are we developing program that maybe some students don't want to identify as a veteran or military connected. So how are we still providing communication, resources, programs for those students that maybe just want to pop in once to get their benefits certified and they don't want to be in the veteran space at all. So I'm sure Montaigne, you might see that as well on your campus.
And I think also just not having that stereotype of what veterans look like, right? Like it's not always going to be the student with the camo backpack that you're going to be able to identify, and also forgetting about, that we have women veterans on our campus. And so the wide variety of what our student experiences can look like for their service, and who they are on our campuses now.
I think it's important for folks to know that obviously you were the co-editors of the Supporting Military Connected College Students uh, book, which I think is well worth the time if you're interested or particularly want to further your knowledge of this population. I would definitely want to know, why do you feel like this book was so important to publish, and why now?
Actually, it was very like spontaneous initially. I was teaching a course both in the spring of 2021 and then again 2022 at Southern Miss, and I was trying to find a text. I was teaching a graduate course, and I was trying to find a text that I could use, to support that course. And I realized very quickly that the most recent, I think, book that was anywhere related was in 2017. And so it was dated, right? And much of the conversation was about student veterans and not thinking more inclusively about our military connected active duty, our partners, spouses, etc. And so it inspired both Montaigne and I to look and reach out to other voices within the field, other practitioners that were doing some really amazing work, but really didn't have a voice or an outlet to showcase the great stuff that they were doing.
We wanted a text that would be written by practitioners for practitioners, that was translating theory into practice in a super easy, digestible way, right? That you can literally buy it on Monday and put it into practice on Tuesday, right? So this is our approach to this book. And that is how we recruited the contributing authors, was those that are actually in the field doing this work. Those that are using theory, that are applying theory to their work, and can give us concrete examples of how this works with their student populations.
I think that the theory into practice really that's always a topic that warms my heart. But also, I know we're going to get into chapter 15. And for those of you who've already read the book, you're probably really excited because chapter 15 is assessment. What I would say is one of the tools. So if you're a higher ed jobs listener and have never looked at our higher ed military site was launched maybe 5+ years ago. It has a lot of useful information and tools for the higher ed military connected community. And the first tool we put out there was actually for reservists. And there's a whole tool there based on institutions and what, if you are a reservist, what sort of ability you have as far as flexibility in your role to go out and meet your duty to the country. And it's amazing to me over the years how many institutions have changed their policy and let us know, or wanted to make sure their policy was there. And I'd say if you're somebody who is military connected and in that community, when you're in a job search, I think that's a great tool to just take a look at and make sure you know what that policy is. I would say even before you apply for a job, because I think that's a reality of your situation. And I think from a philosophical perspective on the website, also feel that taking good theory and putting it into practice is, particularly in this community, extremely important, but also I kind of think speaks to this community and what they want to see from us on the more academic side of things.
There are a lot of theories that have also been developed, within recent years. Since 2017, we're seeing a lot of new things about veteran identity and military transitions. And so we wanted to make sure that we covered that gap in the research that was there surrounding veteran identity and veteran transition. Just kind of some of these newer topics that are coming up surrounding military connected students. So the book also really covers some new research that's out there as well.
We were also very intentional about the user, right? So not just for graduate students, but staff, faculty, right? And so there's intention about putting reflection questions in there for discussion, case studies, like tips for practitioners. So we wanted it to be very user friendly. And this might lead into your next question too, but we also realized very quickly that the student voices weren't often represented within the book itself. And so that was one of the main things that we wanted to make sure was included in this new book.
Well, yeah, you guys were referencing, bringing theory into practice. So, Paul, you set me up well there with this this concept here. It's talking about chapter 1 and the idea of co-production, and the definitions incorporating military-connected students into the design and delivery of campus support services, commonly known, as we said, co-production. So why is co-production so critical? Why did you guys feel like this had to be discussed in this book?
Oh, I was just going to say, we all work with students in some capacity, but I think we recognize that students are their content experts of their own world, of their own experience. And so we, both Montaigne and I, understand co-production as designed not just for students, but with students. And so we could create the most well-intentioned programming, but if the student voice is not involved, right, it could potentially be a flop, right, or not designed well.
I love in the first chapter how Abby Kench from Student Veterans of America puts out 4 different actual people who are connected in this way. And the first quote in there is from Maria, who's a U.S. Navy veteran, undergrad student, first-generation student, single mother, and a member and officer of her own student veteran organization at her school. She says, "Being who I am and looking like I do, I've never quite felt like I fit anywhere, but that also is what motivates me to build spaces where others like me do feel seen." And that really kind of hits the nail right on the head of what you all were trying to accomplish, which is getting a student voice in there, which I think, going back, taking theory into practice, once you're setting yourselves up for success, when you start getting those voices incorporated and responding to what they're reflecting to you.
Paul and I are both military connected, right? But we are no longer students. We want to ensure that our students are represented in the work that we do, whether that's, on campus in this book. So Abby's chapter was extremely important to frame out the rest of the book and how that student voice was going to be continued through every single chapter.
I would like to point out, because you guys have done such a great job of this, that there may be a lot of us who may never be students again, or maybe by choice will never be students again. But we're all learners. But as learners, what did you learn from putting this book together that surprised you that you never knew before?
There was some up and coming theory that some of our contributing authors included in their chapters that were newer topics to me even. So it's great to see how theory is still continuing to evolve in our military connected space, and how that is still relevant for our practitioners to consider when they're working with this population on a daily basis.
Aside from how difficult it is to wrangle a bunch of chapter offers to put something like this together, I think what we learned is that this is not a static product. This will keep growing. It has to keep growing. And even in the Montaigne and I recently presented this at a conference, and we realized, oh, this piece could around organizational culture, for example, could be an additional asset to a book like this. And so I think what I realized, I think we both realized, is that this is just a talking point, a starting point to continue the conversation, but certainly it's not static and needs to continue to grow and evolve.
I love the fact that you guys identified a need and then did something about it. You said like you look back and there wasn't an actual, book or a text, and it was the content you found was from 2017. So it sounds like you both have been. I get the sometimes it's difficult to wrangle, and coordinate everyone, but the rewards are I'm sure are like well worth it.
Thank you for that acknowledgement.
I wanted to be intentional about making sure we did shout outs to the authors. This is hard work. Kelly and I have done this before, and we know, like with everything else, particularly Abby, that she has going on, like to find the time to sit down and concentrate and put something so well thought.
And in fact, actually, I had an opportunity to co-present with Abby for the first time. It was the first time I met her. And what she writes in that chapter is very authentic and true to who she is as a presenter, as a person, and what she's really doing for the larger community, for our military connected students. So go, Abby.
Go, Abby. Let's try to stick with co-production here. Are there some examples or stories of how it's been implemented well, and maybe some stories about how the implementation didn't quite hit the spot that might be useful to folks who are trying to do that sort of co-production?
I see co-production taking place across our A&M system campuses all the time, whether that's surrounding a Veterans Day event and a Veterans Vigil on a campus. But a really great example I can speak to is a wellness initiative that's taking place at our main campus in College Station. There's a partnership with the Counseling Center and the Veteran Resource Center, where an embedded counselor is placed in the Veteran Resource Center to provide, holistic wellness support. And she started off with some programming that just really didn't kind of hit the spot, right? Like students were not super receptive to it. And this is again where we are super well intended in the work that we're trying to do, but there was no co-production. So she totally scrapped that at the end of the fall semester and was like, I just need to get students involved in this. And so bringing military connected students, whether that was veterans or family members, into the process, they revamped the process. They renamed the program to Mission Wellness. So it kind of has this military connection to it. And they started designing topics that they wanted to see, whether that was about financial wellness or spiritual wellness or, actual time management and how that has an impact on your sleep and your physical wellness, right? So that programming just really took off this spring semester once there was student involvement and student voice and that co-production in the programming. So I was just talking to Donna yesterday about this, and now she has students showing up at her programs and being actively involved and having collaboration with people across campus. So just that one little tweak of let me get students involved in this process has made it hugely successful.
I think back to an example, we introduced PAVE, which is the Peer Advisor Veteran Education Program, a nationally recognized program to really peer-to-peer mentoring. Student veterans are trained to work with other student veterans and military-connected students on campus around campus resources, academic success, not just navigating that transition. And what I thought was amazing about it is that the student veterans were essentially that were hired as part of PAVE advisors, peer advisors, were doing the work and creating the programming with just a little bit of scaffolding from myself and my graduate assistant. But genuinely, they were co-producing and creating these events for their peers, right, in the Veteran Services at Cal State San Marcos. The challenge with any large project, any big change, though, the Veteran Center itself wasn't ready for that, so we kind of introduced it a little too quickly, and it didn't launch quite as successful as we did. But that's not to take anything away from University of Michigan's PAVE program itself. Does amazing research and it is very effective in that peer-to-peer mentoring and advising component for our military connected students.
Well, thank you to both of you for explaining those examples, because I think that is prime evidence, proof that we need collaboration across, all different parties, and we need those student voices in the room. So that's fantastic. And the willingness on everyone's part to kind of listen and tweak, like you said, where necessary, and improve things. So yeah, those are great examples. So hopefully people can incorporate the student voices in further programming. So moving on here, I know Andy already referenced his excitement to discuss chapter 15.
This is what everybody has been waiting for.
So there's a couple of quotes that I just wanted to bring out from that chapter, and then we'll talk about it. So the first quote is, the key question that assessment always seeks to understand is the degree to which the intended outcomes of a given program, initiative, or effort were achieved. The second quote is, the entire assessment process is for naught if the results simply sit on a shelf or end up being buried in a report rather than being used to improve the programs and initiatives being assessed. So Paul, Montaigne, can we talk about assessment and how not to feel consumed or defeated by it? Rather, on the flip side, we can be empowered by it.
For me, assessment from the beginning is super important, so that we are assessing the needs of our students when we are designing programming. Again, we can be well-intended, but does it meet the needs of our students? So I think things like needs assessments are really crucial to understand what our students need, what are the challenges that they're experiencing, so that we can create things that support them. So I like a good needs assessment to begin with, to determine what direction we need to go. And then, of course, assessing at various points thereafter. So I don't like assessment just to determine how well we did, but I like assessment to guide the way that we are going.
I love where you're going with that, Montaigne, because I think I see assessment as it's not about proving your worth or the value, right? It's about how can we continue to think about how are we honing this and shaping it so that it's even better, right? It's about improving work. So less about worth, more about improving work. And I, connecting to your example too, around the needs assessment, I was one of those bright and shiny new directors, and I'm like, I've got a great program, and I invited all the campus to come to our veteran space, right? And we were making these cute little succulent things that they could take home. And the only students that showed up to the center were non-veteran military connected students, which is good for visibility in itself. But what I realized is that we need to pulse and do that needs assessment to find out what the students really want, not what the donor wants, not what the VPSA, not what I want, right? It could fit within that vision, but essentially it needs to be the voice of the students. What are their true needs? And so they were looking for things like, I want to know how to interview, I want to know how to get a job. And so we quickly pivoted to that programming to be more inclusive to that those types of services.
I think it's also super valuable to have your students asking their peers, what do they want, right? To get a true response. Paul was talking about the PAVE program and peer-to-peer resources. If you can have your student veterans asking your student veterans, what do you want, right? You're going to get a true response that way, not what the response they think I want to hear is, but actual what their needs are and what they hope to see from your Veteran Resource Center.
I think what's interesting here, particularly hearing the job search that came into it, when I read this chapter, I felt amazingly, I felt like a kindred spirit to the chapter, because so much in the job search process is about the goals you set. If you're setting to make it to College Station, Texas, but your goal is set to go to San Marcos, you're never going to reach your goal. And there's a great part about goals, objectives, and outcomes. And I think the hardest part in this is setting yourself up for success and assessment. And we writ large, academia, people in general, owning our failure. When we don't meet what we're supposed to be doing, understanding the why. So like you said, Paul, or the quote is, to improve the programs and initiatives being assessed to create those outcomes that we want. And doing so honestly and not sugarcoating it, particularly in job search, is essential. But I could also see here, as I think more and more programs want to be scalable and no two programs are exactly the same, it's so essential. And I think Michael Fried's chapter on this is not only very applicable to this community. I think it's remarkably applicable to any sort of assessment about how you go about the pedagogy of assessment. So I've really, really enjoyed the chapter.
Shout out to Michael Fried for that great chapter on assessment, right? Like, again, the work of our contributing authors has been incredible, and we were so fortunate that we were able to work with this great group to compile this text.
Well, Montaigne, Paul, thank you so much for this fantastic conversation today. I really enjoyed it. It was a pleasure having you both on discussing all the fantastic all the fantastic chapters from your edited text. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Whether you're part of the higher ed jobs community or the higher ed military community, it's one of our first podcasts, I believe, that's going to be going to both of those communities. We really thank you for listening, and we hope you found this to be as interesting of a conversation as we did. If you have any questions, thoughts, or comments, please feel free to email us at podcast@higheredjobs.com or send us a direct message on X @higheredcareers. Thank you again for listening, and we look forward to talking again real soon.